the unaware criminal. The driver answered, "We'll arrive at the King Hotel in 20 minutes. I had to take a detour. There's an accident blocking the main road." The change in plans only added to the weight Jason was carrying. It had been an incredibly tough week, with too many things piling up all at once. He still hadn't fully processed the recent tragedy, the suicide of a close friend, a brilliant writer. Why would someone so gifted, with such a powerful voice, do something like that? The thought haunted him. Sitting in the quiet of the limousine, his wife's hand in his, he felt the pressure build. She gave his hand a gentle squeeze, trying to absorb some of his tension. Jason turned to look out the window, his thoughts drifting inward. Am I making the right decision? He wondered, the weight of years pressing down on him. After everything I've built, can I really just... Outside, the blocked streets and restless city lights mirrored his unease. Somewhere beyond the glass, his fans awaited their king of intrigue. Finally, they arrived. The hall was packed with readers eager to celebrate his new bestseller, The Thief of Dreams. Backstage, Jason could feel the electric anticipation in the air, sensing their eagerness to hear about his next project. He saw it in their eyes, a craving, almost an addiction to the thrill and mystery he brought them. Unaware of the unexpected announcement he would make, they waited, captivated by the moment. As he stepped onto the stage, applause erupted, filling the room. They looked up at him with reverence, like devotees drawn toward their guiding light, faces filled with awe. He took a deep breath and stepped onto the stage, the applause crashing over him. As he reached the podium, he looked out at the crowd, all brought together by the worlds he had created. The mix of ages was striking. Young and old alike filled the room, making his audience feel even larger, even more vibrant. There were those who had followed him from the beginning and new dreamers just discovering his stories. Each had found something in his books, a place of escape, a spark of hope. For 30 years, he had poured his heart into every story, facing doubt, stress, and deep emotion. But now, surrounded by their support, he felt it had all been worth it. "Dear readers," he began, his voice filled with emotion, "thank you for being here with me, as always, to celebrate this moment." He paused, catching his wife's gaze in the crowd. In that shared look, he felt her persistent support. Remembering the years spent chasing his dream, the late nights, the vacations cut short, the interminable hours searching for inspiration. He saw the understanding in her eyes, a quiet acceptance of all the sacrifices they had made together to reach this moment. "Today isn't just about my latest book, The Thief of Dreams," he continued, his voice trembling, "but about all of you to whom I owe everything." His words hung in the silence, filled with gratitude and a hint of regret. He knew his announcement would come as a shock, maybe even a disappointment, to those who had grown attached to his characters and their stories. But he also knew it was time to step away from the relentless demands of his career and finally honor the life he had promised his wife. A life that had been waiting quietly in the background for too long. He took a steadying breath, letting his gaze sweep over the audience. "I know this may come as a surprise," he said softly, "but tonight I stand before you to announce my retirement. After years of weaving stories, of creating worlds and characters you've come to know, I have reached the end of my journey as a writer." He paused. The gravity of his words took hold. It hasn't been an easy decision. Writing has been my life, my passion, but as with all things in life, there comes a time to let go. Every story, every journey has its ending, and this is mine. He smiled gently. His eyes reflected sadness and peace. Thank you for being a part of this incredible ride. You've given my words a place to live and breathe. I hope my stories stay with you, long after I've stopped writing them. As Jason stepped down from the stage, his words still hanging in the air, he was met with applause that felt both warm and bittersweet. The clinking of glasses and gentle hum of conversation filled the reception hall, creating a backdrop of celebration and farewell. Moving through the crowd, his wife's hand in his, he was struck by a wave of emotions. Faces lit with admiration, eyes filled with gratitude, and even a touch of concern. It was overwhelming and humbling all at once. He knew he had made the right choice, yet a part of him mourned the world he was leaving behind, the characters who had lived within him for so long. A close friend approached, her voice soft with respect. Walking away from this success takes immense courage, she said. Jason smiled. Feeling of relief and uncertainty lingered in his gaze. Sometimes, he replied, the hardest decision is the right one, even when it means letting go of something that is part of you. Later that night, Jason leaned over and placed a tender kiss on his wife's forehead, whispering, I finally did it. A sense of relief settled over him. After months of carrying the weight of this decision, he had finally let it go. But alongside that relief was a sweet sorrow feeling, saying goodbye to the world he had lived in for years, the only life he had ever known. Now he faced the challenge of stepping into a new one, uncertain and unfamiliar. His wife smiled softly and replied, Good night, sweetheart. With a final lingering sigh, Jason closed his eyes and drifted off to sleep. His soft snores soon filled the room, releasing the tension that had haunted him since he decided to retire. Almost immediately, he found himself in a vast arena, its circular layout reminiscent of ancient gladiator combats. The sight jolted him. This bizarre place was unlike anything he had ever seen or imagined. In disbelief, he raised a hand and slapped his own face, hoping to snap out of what must surely be a dream. But the slap stung, and everything around him remained unsettlingly real. The polished marble floor reflected the stern faces of spectators, all gathered for a purpose he couldn't yet comprehend. At the far end, on a raised platform, sat a panel of judges in traditional British robes and powdered wigs, their expressions as unreadable as stone. Rows upon rows of people stretched back, their faces a strange mix of wonder, excitement, and solemnity. Alone in the center, Jason faced this disturbing scene, his pulse quickening with a sharp, instinctual unease. Jason Austen, the judge's voice boomed, echoing through the vast arena. You stand accused by your own characters of two grave offenses. First, your sudden abandonment of your creative duties has left them stranded in the barren wasteland of your subconscious, their lives fading into the unknown as you turn your back on them. Second, you are charged with years of torment and manipulation over your 30-year reign as their creator. A murmur spread through the crowd, faces filled with suspense and morbid curiosity. They say you toyed with their emotions as if they were mere playthings, the judge continued, his tone cold and unyielding. You forced them to undergo the darkest sides of your imagination, pouring onto them the weight of your own inner battles and the misery you had once experienced. all to feel good yourself. They endured your wrath when inspiration waned, suffering your neglect and indifference as you grew tired of their stories. You cast them into roles they despised, twisted their destinies, and set them against each other in a cruel game of jealousy and conflict. They have known poverty and wealth, health and sickness, love and loss, all at your whim. Now, they demand justice for every tear shed, every heartbreak endured, and every life unjustly cut short. Jason's mind reeled, struggling to grasp the absurdity of the situation. Characters? He scoffed. They are merely constructs of my imagination, with no existence beyond the pages. He shook his head, trying to convince himself that this was just a strange dream, a product of his overactive mind. 30 years I've dedicated to this craft, he muttered, and now, the moment I choose to step away, they rise to judge me. This is madness. He glanced over the faces staring back at him, their expressions full of resentment and eagerness. And why me? He demanded, his voice echoing through the arena. I'm not the only writer who has ever lived. Millions before me, millions to come. Why am I singled out? The central judge's lips curled into a sarcastic smile. Who told you that you were the only one, Mr. Austen? He replied, his voice laced with chilling amusement. Our work here is unending. We handle countless accused writers every day. Our schedule is so packed that we often have to postpone judgments due to lack of time. He paused, allowing his words to sink in. We preside over all manner of literary transgressions. Those called forth by their own creations, like yourself, are merely the tip of the iceberg. We also deal with plagiarists who steal the words and ideas of others, writers who churn out uninspired drivel, and even those who dare to pass off AI-generated content as their own. Additionally, we hold accountable authors who distort historical facts or misrepresent cultural stories. The human world, Mr. Austen, is rife with literary crimes, and we are here to see that justice is served. A burst of sardonic laughter escaped from Jason, echoing through the silent arena. Unbelievable, he exclaimed, shaking his head. In all my years, I've never even gotten a traffic ticket, let alone broken any laws. I'm a model citizen, a respected author whose work has inspired millions. People say my stories have changed their lives, and yet here I am accused of what exactly? Doing my job? Creating worlds and characters that captivate readers? He threw his hands up in frustration. So, tell me, esteemed judges, what are these supposed crimes I've committed? We need not look too far back, Mr. Austen, the judge replied, his tone icy and unsympathetic. Let's consider your most recent work, The Thief of Dreams. Think of Emily and Julian, the young protagonists whose lives were devastated by the cruel schemes of the dream thief you so heartlessly created. Do you consider their suffering just another part of your narrative? At the mention of their names, the crowd turned to look at two figures seated among them. Jason's gaze followed, finally spotting Emily and Julian. Emily, once a lively child filled with dreams of stardom, now sat hunched, her expression hollow. The dream thief hadn't just taken her vision board. He had stolen something far more precious, her hope. Beside her, Julian looked equally empty, the light that had once shone in his eyes now extinguished. Julian had once dreamed of a family to call his own, a room where he could hang his superhero posters, and a place to feel loved. But the dream thief had robbed him of even that simple wish, leaving him forgotten, destined to remain alone in the stark, unchanging reality of the orphanage. Emily and Julian's silent grief spoke volumes. Their trembling forms, weighed down by stolen dreams, told a story of profound loss. The judge's voice cut through the tense air, harsher now. Why, Mr. Austen, did you subject them to such torment? Who gave you the right to play God with their lives, to shape their destinies according to your whims? Their pain is real, their suffering a direct result of your heartless disregard for their well-being. And Jason stared at the weeping teenagers, horror and disbelief evident in his eyes. The line between his fiction and their reality had blurred, leaving him speechless. This is real, he whispered, his voice barely audible. As the weight of his creation's suffering pressed down on him, Jason tried to retreat into the safety of his writer's imagination, searching for any justification for the pain he had inflicted. Surely there had been a reason, a lesson meant to teach resilience, to show that true strength lies deep within us, beyond the reach of even the darkest fate. But his mind found no comfort, only an echoing void where certainty once resided. The dream thief. He stole dreams, not their reality, Jason murmured, his voice gaining a tremulous strength as he clung to his rationale. This was meant to show that, no matter what happens, true strength comes from within, that nothing external can take that away. His voice faltered, the conviction he sought crumbling into doubt. He hadn't fully thought it through, not truly. A cold sadness washed over him, almost paralyzing. This is just imagination, he tried to reassure himself. A narrative woven from the fabric of thought. The audience's faces, twisted with anger and shock, held none of the forgiveness or understanding Jason silently hoped for. As the tension in the room mounted, the judge struck the gavel sharply. "Order! Mr. Austen!" he commanded, his voice cutting through the murmurs of discontent. "This is deplorable. You are seeing firsthand the pain you've inflicted on these two young souls." Jason's gaze shifted to Emily and Julian, their faces marked with the raw scars of anguish, fictional yet painfully real. His heart tightened. What had begun as an act of storytelling had spiraled into a horrifying reckoning. Whatever your intentions, they do not excuse the consequences of your actions, the judge continued, his tone unyielding. These characters, though products of your imagination, have felt every ounce of the suffering you created. Can you still deny the gravity of what you've done? As the weight of the judge's words sank in, Jason's defenses began to crumble. He could no longer hide behind the role of a storyteller. The anguish of his characters was all too real, a reflection of the darker impulses within his own creativity. "Let us consider another case, Mr. Austen," the judge continued, his voice cold and resolute. "The tragic story of Sophia, the protagonist in your so-called romance, a woman subjected to an endless line of unworthy men, each encounter eroding her hope for real love. You seem to revel in manipulating her emotions, using these characters to bring her nothing but pain and heartbreak. Countless failed relationships, Mr. Austen. Tell me, whose heart could bear such repeated disappointment? Who could remain whole after enduring such turmoil?" The judge's gaze was intense, his anger sharp. This wasn't entertainment. It was a cruel game with a fragile soul. In the audience, Jason's eyes found Sophia, her once bright blue gaze now dulled, her spirit crushed by perpetual heartbreak. He recognized her immediately, the character he had so carefully crafted, a hopeful, vibrant woman who had searched for love on social media, through friends, at work, and on dating sites, believing each new man could be the one. But he had placed only manipulators, narcissists, and liars in her path. Every relationship, promising at first, had led only to betrayal. It was meant to raise awareness, Jason defended, his voice barely steady. To show the dangers of toxic relationships, to empower women. I never intended harm. Stronger? The judge interrupted, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Are you suggesting you fortified her heart, transforming it into an impenetrable fortress devoid of feeling? Is that the legacy you intended for her, Mr. Austin? A wave of remorse swept over Jason as he absorbed the judge's harsh words. Sophia's pain, once merely a plotline, now stood before him, raw and undeniable. Her once vibrant, confident presence had faded. She appeared broken, like a flower trampled underfoot. He lowered his head, guilt tightening around him. I never meant to cause them pain, he murmured, his voice barely audible. If I had known, I would never have. His words faltered, lost in the weight of his regret. What can I do to make things right? He asked, his tone filled with genuine resolve. To heal the wounds you inflicted through your writing, the judge declared, his gaze piercing. You must rewrite your stories, ensuring justice and healing for your characters. Jason's eyes widened in dismay. Rewrite? He stammered. But I've retired. I made promises to my wife, to my readers, and to myself. Another judge interjected, his tone severe and uncompromising. Which is precisely why we expediting your judgment, Mr. Austin. We summoned you the moment you announced your regrettable decision. Regrettable? Jason protested, his voice escalating in shock. How can you label it that? And what? The chief judge pressed, his tone icy. If you refuse to comply. A tense silence filled the arena as Jason considered the gravity of defiance. Do you truly think this is trivial, Mr. Austin? The judge continued, his voice now menacing. This tribunal enforces its rulings without exception. Jason's voice quaked as he inquired. And what would that judgment entail? We will invade your dreams, night after night, the judge pronounced, his words resonating like a grim prophecy. We will haunt your waking thoughts, tormenting you until sleep becomes a distant memory. You will face a choice, succumb to the madness of sleep deprivation or follow the path of many before you and end your own life. He paused, letting the gravity of his words sink in. There is no other option, Mr. Austin. Rectify your wrongs or face the dire consequences. Despair and fear closed in around Jason as the judge's words shattered his disbelief. Could this truly be happening? A memory surfaced, sharp and unwelcome. He was younger then, eager to make his mark in the unforgiving world of publishing. His editor had urged him to amplify the conflict, to make the drama more intense and gripping. So he had complied, transforming his kind, gentle protagonist into a victim of unrelenting hardship, rationalizing it as necessary for her eventual triumph. But now, seeing Sophia's anguish firsthand, he grasped the true cost of those choices. Had it all been an attempt to wield control in a world where he felt powerless? The mysterious suicide of his friend, a brilliant mind who had taken his own life at the height of his success, now struck him with chilling clarity. Could his friend have been another casualty of this tribunal? A soul driven to despair by the weight of his own stories? The thought lodged itself deeply within Jason, an inescapable burden pressing down as he grappled with the possibility of facing a similar fate. This is our verdict, the judge declared, his voice laced with finality. You have accumulated a staggering 5,000 infractions against your characters, each one demanding reparation. The crowd erupted, their cheers and applause filling the arena. Jason spun around, his eyes wide with horror as he grasped the source of their celebration. Those, a voice sneered from behind him, dripping with bitterness, are the victims of your actions. 5,000? Jason whispered, his mind reeling at the enormity of the accusation. 30 years, Mr. Austin, the judge continued, his tone chilling. For 3 decades, you reveled in this cycle of creation and destruction. Now, the time has come to face the consequences. All the accolades, the awards, the admiration, they mean nothing against the suffering you have caused. Jason nodded, overwhelmed by shock and a growing sense of despair. The faces of his characters, once merely figments of his imagination, now confronted him with tangible pain and accusation. His thoughts drifted to his wife, to the promises of a future they had envisioned together. What could he possibly tell her now? For 3 decades, he had crafted stories with the sole aim of captivating his readers, never pausing to consider the ethical boundaries he might have crossed. In his pursuit of originality and impact, he had, like many before him, ventured into dark territory, subjecting his characters to grim fates and relentless trials. As he sat there, surrounded by the palpable hostility of his own creations, a troubling realization dawned on Jason. Had anyone ever warned him about the immense responsibility that came with creative power? In the literary world, where competition and a hunger for innovation often took precedence, the deeper moral implications of storytelling were rarely considered. But now, confronted with the consequences of his own choices, he couldn't ignore the impact of his work. What if the villains he had crafted inspired real-life cruelty? What if his dark narratives, woven from the depths of his imagination, incited to actions in those with twisted intentions? The thought sent a chill down his spine, awakening a storm of guilt. The ethical boundaries he had once overlooked now bore down on him with crushing weight. This moment of introspection brought clarity. Jason realized that his role as a storyteller extended beyond mere entertainment. It required a mindfulness of his story's influence. The once blurred lines between fiction and reality were now sharply defined, forcing him to confront his responsibility. As he grappled with these revelations, the tribunal's judgment reverberated not only around him but deep within, signaling the beginning of a painful yet essential transformation. Suddenly, the imposing figures of the judges faded, and the vast arena vanished, replaced by the familiar comfort of his bedroom. Jason jolted awake, heart pounding, and drenched in a cold sweat. His wife stirred beside him, her eyes filled with concern. "Jason, darling, what's wrong?" He reached out, his voice shaky as he murmured, "Just a bad dream." As he lay back down, surrounded by her warmth, the lessons from his nightmare solidified. This wasn't just about stepping away from his writing. It had been a profound warning. The tribunal, the accusations, the guilt, it was all a reminder of the potential harm careless storytelling could cause. A strong sense of responsibility washed over him. Though he had decided to retire, he now felt a new purpose emerging. He needed to leave behind a message for other writers, a cautionary tale about the importance of ethical storytelling. Jason resolved to write one final story, calling it The Unaware Criminal, to show what could happen when writers ignore the impact of their words. Yet a new worry surfaced. How would he explain this to his wife? She had been so supportive of his decision to leave writing behind. Maybe, he thought, if I tell her about the dream, she'll understand. After all, it's just one short story. With this decision, Jason felt a renewed sense of purpose. This story wouldn't be for fame or recognition, but to spark a conversation on the responsibility that comes with creating worlds and characters.